In 1952, a 24-year-old aeronautical engineer built a racing car in a stable. Behind a pub in North London, it won. By 1963, Lotus had introduced the monocoque chassis to Formula One. 7 levels. Let's get into it. Level 1, the Emira, the last petrol Lotus. Starts around $77,000 for the 4-cylinder AMG-sourced 2.0-liter turbocharged engine producing 360 horsepower. The V6 configuration, a 3.5-liter Toyota-derived supercharged unit, starts around $95,000 and produces 400 horsepower. The Emira is a mid-engine 2-seat sports car. It looks extraordinary. It sounds extraordinary. It drives with the kind of precision and feedback that most sports cars at twice the price cannot replicate. The interior, unlike every Lotus interior before it, does not require the driver to apologize to their passenger for anything. The infotainment works. The switchgear feels substantial. The driving position is correct. The seats hold you. This is a departure from tradition that previous Lotus customers will recognize as progress, and that purists will quietly resent for being too comfortable, which is the specific kind of criticism that only Lotus can generate. Level 2, the Elise and Exige. The Elise launched in 1996, a 2-seat roadster built on an extruded aluminum chassis, a 1.8-liter naturally aspirated engine producing 118 horsepower in the base car. Not fast by any contemporary metric. Faster than almost anything else at that weight. Weight is the enemy of driving dynamics. The Elise treated weight as an ethical position. The Exige was the Elise with a roof and more power, and the formal acknowledgement that some customers wanted the Elise's dynamics in a configuration that could visit a track without immediately embarrassing anything that arrived in a car that cost 3 times as much. The Elise was discontinued in 2021 after 25 years of production, 35,000 cars. The Elise's discontinuation was not a market failure. It was a market statement. The world had stopped buying what the Elise was selling. The people who understood what it was selling are still grieving, quietly, in the way that enthusiasts grieve, by buying used examples and maintaining them carefully and explaining them to people who will never fully understand. Level 3. The Evora. The Evora launched in 2009. The first Lotus with a proper rear seat. A 3.5-liter Toyota V6 producing 276 horsepower in the base car. A car that could be driven daily. Not easily, not without some accommodation to its sports car nature, but daily. That was new for Lotus. The Evora's problem was positioning. It was too expensive to compete with the Porsche Cayman and not quite prestigious enough to compete with the 911. Too practical to maintain the Lotus brand's commitment to extreme lightness. It weighed 3,000 pounds, a number that would have made Colin Chapman reach for his pen. Who bought the Evora? The Lotus enthusiast who had graduated from an Elise and needed a car that his wife would also use on occasions without filing formal objections. The driver who genuinely wanted a Porsche alternative and chose the Lotus because the driving dynamics were better in ways that were immediately apparent, and the running costs were lower in ways that were not. And the collector who bought one knowing that any car that sells in these numbers, from this brand, at this quality level, will be undervalued at the time and correctly valued in retrospect. I break down systems like this every week. Subscribe if you want to follow along. Now back to it. Level 4, the Lotus Formula One Legacy. Not a car you can buy. A context that shapes every car Lotus has ever made and will ever make. Lotus won 7 Formula One Constructors' Championships, 6 Drivers' Championships, 79 race victories. They introduced the monocoque chassis, the aerodynamic wing, the ground effect aerodynamics, and the active suspension. The drivers who won championships in Lotus cars were not winning because of superior resources. Lotus was perpetually under-resourced relative to Ferrari and later McLaren. They were winning because Colin Chapman was solving problems that nobody else had identified as problems yet. This legacy does not depreciate. When Lotus charges $77,000 for an Emira or $2 million for an Evija, the price includes the accumulated credibility of a company that rewrote the rules of its industry repeatedly. Chapman's ghost is in the pricing model. It has been since 1982. Level 5. The Lotus Emeya and Eletre. The Eletre, an electric SUV. From Lotus, the Eletre weighs 5,300 pounds. Colin Chapman's Elise weighed 1,560. The Eletre produces 603 horsepower in the standard configuration, 905 in the R version. It handles with a precision that its weight should make impossible, and somehow doesn't. Lotus has carried something of Chapman's instinct into the electric era. The Emeya, an electric Grand Tourer, 905 horsepower, a design that is unmistakably Lotus in its aggression and clarity, starting at around $106,000. The Emeya exists in the same segment as the Porsche Taycan and the Audi e-tron GT, which are both exceptional products, and competes on the grounds that it is more focused, more dramatic, and carries a brand history that neither competitor possesses. Whether that history transfers to an electric Grand Tour is the question the next several years will answer. Level 6. The Lotus Evija. The product that Lotus used to announce that it intended to be taken seriously at the top of the performance hierarchy. 2,000 horsepower. 2,000. From a 70 kilowatt-hour battery, top speed of 200 miles per hour. Production limited to 130 units. Price starting at approximately $2.3 million. The number is significant enough that it functions less as a specification and more as a positioning statement. Lotus has placed itself, with this single vehicle, in a conversation that includes Bugatti, Koenigsegg, and Rimac. Not because the car is better than all of those, because the number and the name and the heritage behind the name earns the seat at the table. The Evija's design carries the aerodynamic DNA that the Lotus Formula One cars established in the 1970s. The car is not just referencing the legacy, it is extending it. Chapman built cars that generated downforce by manipulating airflow beneath the car. The Evija is generating downforce by manipulating airflow through the car. The principle is the same. The application is 50 years more sophisticated. Most of the 130 allocated units have been spoken for. It means each one is finite. Each one is documented. Each one is the physical evidence of a company that built its credibility in a stable in North London in 1952 and has not fully spent it yet. Level 7. The Lotus Type 62-2. The vehicle that is not a new car and not a vintage car, but something stranger and more specific. A modern recreation of a 1969 racing car built to an owner's specification for road use in a limited edition of 62 units. A mid-mounted supercharged V6 producing 430 horsepower in the standard configuration and 570 in the heritage specification. Manual gearbox, road legal, pricing around $1.1 million. Each one built by Lotus in Hethel by hand, to a specification that the buyer defines in a process that takes months and involves conversations about color, material, and the owner's relationship to the original 1969 car's history. The final expressions of a company that began with no money in a stable and has periodically, across 7 decades, produced something that changed what everyone else thought was possible. If this was useful, subscribe. I break down how things actually work, not how the brochure describes them. See you in the next one.